Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey back in time, returning to Paris in the year 1793, a place where even a poorly timed sneeze could cost you your head. This is not textbook history. This is a slice of everyday life where people bathed in filthy rain had breakfast with bread harder than bricks, and found entertainment by clapping as heads dropped into baskets. If you enjoy stories that are dark yet witty, brutally real yet strangely human, then hit subscribe and join me as we survive each revolutionary night together. But only subscribe if this truly feels like something you want to be a part of, because I am not chasing numbers, only sincerity. Leave a comment to let me know where and when you are listening from, because there is something fascinating about how each night we come together from different time zones, sharing the same space of curiosity. Now turn off the lights. Let a soft fan hum in the background if you enjoy ambient noise. And let me tell you a story of how people still managed to live even when the whole world was waiting for them to die. You open your eyes. Not because the alarm clock rang, but because of a cry echoing from the end of the alley. Liberty, equality, fraternity, mingling with the clatter of aluminum pans and the manic barking of dogs. A symphony of democracy, the version with wild speeches and heads rolling. You try to take a deep breath to wake yourself up. First mistake of the day. The stench assaults you like an invading army. Damp straw cat urine, the pungent smell of mold, all blending together like a perfume for the working class ode to revolution. Blanket. Not quite. You are wrapped in a burlap sack that used to hold potatoes. Mattress. Just a soggy pile of straw placed dangerously close to the sewer drain. One wrong turn in your sleep, and you would fall straight into the brown river of revolution flowing through the street. You sit up. The first sensation, your spine just dropped 3 vertebrae. The second, your chest feels hollow, and your stomach growls like a militia meeting. Hunger. The 1793 Paris kind of hunger, meaning you do not need a diet to lose weight. Life has already taken care of that for you. You look around. The room, if you dare call it that without insulting the concept of architecture, is just 4 cracked walls, a leaky roof, and a rat hole that serves as a revolving hotel door. Outside sunlight pierces through a wooden plank covering the window, casting dusty rays into the air like a miracle. A miracle of poverty. You drag yourself toward the door. Each step is a prayer, not because you are religious, but because you are afraid the rotting floorboards might betray you at any moment. Good morning, Paris, the city of light, where most of the light comes from burning aristocrats. You open the door, and the smell of the street slaps you in the face. Warm, familiar, like being slapped with a dead fish. The acrid scent of gunpowder from the barracks 3 blocks away, the stale wine spilled last night still floating in the gutters, and from somewhere farther off the smell of meat, either from a street vendor cart or a recent revolutionary accident that occurred around midnight. You do not ask. Asking too many questions these days is the quickest way for your head to meet a woven basket. The sound of the guillotine echoes again. Clack, the slicing blade that awakens the entire city. You shiver, not from fear, you are used to it, but because the morning is as cold as the hearts of Parisians when there is no bread. Speaking of bread, you search your pockets. Empty. Not a single coin. Not a single ration ticket. Only a loose button and a scrap of paper chewed by rats with no name left on it. Your only possession is your honor, which cannot be traded for food and certainly does not buy trust. You stroll down the street. People are arguing at the soup stall. An old woman screams that the broth is too thin. The vendor yells back, "At least I do not sell fake news to the government." You slip by quickly. This place is more prone to wooden spoon stabbings than you might think. You pass by Place de la Concorde, once known as Place Louis XV, but now renamed as swiftly as people switch political sides. It used to be a place for nobles to take walks. Now, a guillotine stage. No barricades, no platform, just blood flowing and applause. You see a child jumping rope with a string of chicken intestines. Behind him stands a large sign, "Justice for the People, Death to Traitors." No logo, no hashtag, but highly effective. You turn to head back when you hear a voice, not a loudspeaker, but a shout through a tin megaphone. Anyone who reports a tax-evading noble shall receive a portion of bread and the nation's gratitude. You glance at the man next to you. His coat is cleaner than yours. His hat has a feather. His smile is educated. You do not know who he is, but your heart has made a decision. A piece of bread. Sounds delicious. You turn back, not to snitch, but to run, fast, back to your straw pile. You do not want to be an informant, but you also do not want to starve. So you choose the neutral path hide. What is a revolutionary ideal when your stomach is empty? You do not know. You only know today's hunger is different from yesterday's. It comes with the smell of blood. You curl back up in your straw bed, shivering. Your heartbeat slows. A cockroach crawls across your face as if to remind you you are still alive. At least for today. Tomorrow. That depends on who loses their head next. Paris, the city of love where you can love life right up to the last second, while your head is still attached to your neck. You see, not everyone is born to be a noble, but at least you still have one privileged survival in the city of revolution, where death needs no reason, just a name on a list. Good night, if you dare to sleep. You just survived a night colder than the heart of a turnip vendor during the lean season. But before you can celebrate being alive, your body gently reminds you it is time to take care of internal remains. You need to use the toilet. Well, the word toilet sounds so modern, so convenient, and filled with the luxurious scent of bleach. Here, the closest thing to a toilet is a dead-end alley behind the bakery where people squat and pray the wind does not blow the wrong way. You grab an empty tin can, once home to pickled vegetables 3 months ago, and sneak out back. No door, no lid, no privacy. The wall back there knows your face so well it could call your name in a crowd. You crouch. And right at that moment from the loft above, someone opens a window. Gardes l'eau, they yell, and a bucket of waste descends like a meteorite. You dodge it, this time. No one apologizes. In Paris, in the year 1793, dodging human waste counts as a national-level blessing. You sigh. Step out. Try to wipe your shoes on the roots of a tree that has endured more than the government of Louis XVI. You think about bathing, a thought as naive and dangerous as shouting, "I love the Queen in the middle of the marketplace." Bathing means finding water, clean water, and a place where no one throws rocks at you when you undress. The Seine River. You could try if you are ready to drink the urine of hundreds of people bathing upstream. Rainwater. Possibly clean if you collect it from a rooftop, not home to a dead rat. You give up. You take a towel, really just a piece of gray linen, and wipe your face dry. No water, only dust and hope. Hair still on your head. That is good news. But it has become a legal residence for 3 lice nests and a thriving flea colony. You scratch your scalp like you are playing violin for a symphony of microbes. Painful, but rhythmic. You pull out a piece of soap, a grayish-brown lump without scent or shape, made from wood ash, pig fat, and despair. You rub your hands. No lather. You think about hand sanitizer in modern supermarkets, the ones with lavender scent and flip-top caps that feel like magic. Here you pop the lid off your tin can and sigh. There is no lavender in your life, only the scent of class struggle. You look around, no mirror, no comb. You wipe your face with your hands. Natural oils combined with dust form a handmade clay mask. Honestly, not too bad if you are preparing to audition for the role of revolutionary zombie. Teeth you poke around with your finger. 2 are loose. 1 smells. You grab a twig, sharpened at one end, and call it a toothbrush. Then you scrub. Scrub like you are atoning for sins from the night before. No toothpaste, only salt, which you stole from the food supply 3 weeks ago. You never thought you would cry over a lack of fluoride, until now. You spit, blood, you smile, mistake. Smiling makes it worse. You chew on no, there is nothing to chew on. You chew on patience. Your breath could wake the dead, but it is fine. In Paris, no one cares. The living stink. The dead are silent. You put your shirt back on. Yesterday's sweat still clings. The armpits have turned color. You raise your arm to sniff, then instantly decide to keep your arms down as much as possible today. You think about perfume, those divine modern drops of fragrance. Here, the only scent you wear is the essence of your own long-term existence. Your stomach growls again. But it is not yet time for food. It is time to ask yourself, is cleaning yourself in a world this filthy an act of rebellion? You do not know. You only know this if today you survive without smelling so bad that someone throws you into the river. That is already a victory. Good morning, Paris. Good morning, revolution. You have finished the hygiene part. Next comes breakfast, or more precisely, the absence of breakfast. Brace yourself. Hunger will not kill you, but bread might, if you dare to fight for it against a widow hiding a knife. You have just scraped a few lice from your hair. Your mouth still tastes of blood after that toothbrushing with a stick when your stomach, exhausted, decides to speak for itself. It does not growl. It cries. And you understand. It is time for breakfast. Apologies. It is time to wait for what does not exist. Breakfast, in Paris, 1793, is not a meal. It is a test of faith. You step into the street, your eyes hazy like a zombie with one clear mission to find something edible that will not get you arrested for treason. You turn into the market. Market is a generous term. It is a line of rickety wooden tables, a queue that stretches all the way to City Hall, and an old woman cursing at an onion for being too expensive. You carry no money. You carry ration coupons, a crumpled piece of paper certifying that you, a loyal citizen of the Republic, deserve to receive a scrap of bread every 2 days. You look at the line. They also have coupons. They are also hungry. They also deserve to eat. But no one is certain there will be anything left to distribute today. A soldier stands at the market corner. His eyes are bloodshot. His hand rests close to the grip of his musket. Hunger can turn men into wolves. Guns make wolves think twice before howling. You wait 45 minutes. Your turn. The woman behind the counter looks you up and down like you are a loaf thief in disguise. Name John. That is what you say. Your real name does not matter. As long as it is not Lewis, that name is a death sentence now. She flips through the list, then pulls from behind the counter. A piece of bread. No. Wait. Calling it bread is an insult to gluten worldwide. It is a 6-inch object as hard as truth, as heavy as disappointment, and the color of construction stone. You take it. It warms your hand and chills your heart. You try to bite. Your teeth object. The bread retaliates by snapping in half, precisely at your 4th molar. You spit. Not the bread, your own broken tooth. You give a bitter smile. This bread is not meant to be eaten. It is meant to kill time, or be used as a weapon. No wonder someone threw a loaf at a soldier yesterday, and the soldier thought it was a brick. You knock on it. It echoes. If you rub it hard enough, it might spark. You pocket it. Save it. Maybe you can trade it for a turnip this afternoon. You do not give up. There is still hope. You have heard that on Rue des Martyrs, an old man sells soup. You find him. He sits beneath a faded tarp beside a massive cast-iron pot, suspiciously similar to something used for smelting metal. Steam rises. The smell is not clearly food, more like rotting leaves. What kind of soup? Old Man Liberty soup. What is in it? What was left after Liberty was sautéed? You peer into the pot. Something floats: a vegetable scrap, a single bean, and a yet unidentified object. Could be lotus root. Could be a fingernail. Hard to tell. You pay with your 2nd coupon, saved over 3 days. He scoops out a ladle, pours it into a tin bowl. Steam rises. The smell is strange. You blow on it, sip, and it is perfect. If you enjoy the taste of boiled lettuce water mixed with burnt air, you finish it, because it is all you have. You feel full, not from food, but because another layer of pride inside you has just been buried. Across the street, a child gnaws on a potato peel. No flesh, just skin. You look at him. He looks at you. Both of you understand hunger has made people so polite they no longer steal from one another. You head back, passing the old bakery owned by the expelled Jewish family. The door is shut. Dust covers the window. On a wooden board, the faded words remain: pastries, for those who still hope. You pause, smile, then move on. On the way back, you hear a voice from a tin megaphone. Whoever reports a tax-dodging granary will receive 2 loaves of bread. You think about it. You know a house, wealthy, discreet. You know they have a stockpile. You know you are hungry. You lower your head. Keep walking. Your heart is as empty as this morning's soup pot. At home, you try to break the bread, using a piece of cloth as a knife. It will not break. You slam it against the table. The table breaks. The bread does not. You chew, not with teeth, but with the sheer determination to survive. You close your eyes. You imagine, someday far in the future, people having breakfast with fried eggs, soft bread, unsalted butter, orange juice. You do not know what orange juice is, but you do know this. In the year 1793, breakfast is a reminder that revolution can topple a throne, but it cannot bake a decent loaf of bread. You take another bite. Your mouth bleeds, but your heart is used to it. Breakfast in Paris that year is not for the faint-hearted or the faint-toothed. You have survived, at least until noon. But you are still hungry, and the day is far from over. You have just shoved the stone-like piece of bread into your mouth when your body sends a new signal cold. Not the cute kind of cold that a jacket can fix, but the kind that slips through every seam, every tooth gap, and especially the parts you really wish it would not. So you stand up, hoping to get dressed like a proper free citizen of the new republic. Your next mistake of the day. You look over at what you call your wardrobe. In truth, it is an old onion basket, and inside is exactly one outfit. More precisely, a gray wool cloth that used to be a shirt, now transformed into a symbol of despair. You pull it out, stiff as this morning's bread. You give it a shake. Something drops out, probably a bug. You do not react. In this world, the only living thing on your clothing is also the only thing still invested in your existence. The shirt has 2 sleeves, but only one remains intact. The other was torn off and once stitched with thread pulled from a burlap sack. After one wash in rainwater mixed with ash soap, it shrank into a side flap. You put it on. What touches your skin is industrial-grade friction. The wool scrapes against the salt crystals left behind by last night's sweat. It feels like being gently punished with sandpaper. Next, the pants. A poor man's version of farmer trousers, loose at the knees but cruelly tight at more sensitive regions. You bend down to step in and notice the hem is gone. Someone cut it off last week to trade for a dried fish. Possibly you. You cannot remember. These pants have no buttons, only a fabric tie around the waist. Too tight you cannot breathe. Too loose they drop every time you bend to pick up trash. You choose shallow breathing, but dignity intact. Shoes. You laugh. Shoes are for merchants or corpses that have not been stripped yet. You look at your feet, calloused, cracked, wrapped in thick cloth that smells faintly of old wine. You slip on your fabric slippers, once potato sacks. The soles are wooden, lined with newspaper. The toe tips a mystery. No one knows what they are made of, but they certainly are not waterproof. You stand up. You feel like a cosplay version of a walking dried turnip. Every step you take is a soundtrack swish, clack, shuffle, gasp. You remember the modern age, a wardrobe with hoodies, jeans, stretchy cotton t-shirts. Here, one layer of damp wool plus a persistent ache in the groin. You have a scarf, actually an old rope cut short, good for warmth, and handy for hanging things if needed. You glance into a puddle. Your reflection is distorted, but it is clear you do not look human. You look like a cautionary tale about the failure of fashion trends. Then you remember the hat. You search and find it. A felt piece that once was a fedora now collapsed on one side like it lost a fight with a rooster. You place it on your head. Wind blows. The hat flies away. You do not chase it. You understand that anything that leaves you in this era simply does not want to be associated with you anymore. You slip your hands into your coat pocket and find something. A button. You smile. A small victory. Something that has not yet decayed. They say clothes make the man. Here, clothes make you disappear into the crowd, like a glitched update of the revolution. You step into the street. People pass by, also ragged, also filthy. But strangely, you feel comfortable. No one stares. No one judges. Because everyone here is wearing survival, not clothing. A child walks by holding a torn cap. He looks at you, nods as if to say, "I get it. You suffer too." You nod back. An old lady shouts from her balcony, "Hey you, wearing that shirt, longing for the monarchy, are you?" You do not reply. You walk faster. In Paris, 1793, one fashion misstep, and your head takes a fall. You turn into a narrow street, bend down to pick up a propaganda flyer. The wind catches your shirt, exposing part of your shoulder. Someone whistles, not because you are seductive, but because they think you might be a spy disguised as a pauper. You pull your shirt back in place. Keep walking. Your feet are scraped. Your hands are numb, but your head is still attached to your neck. That is a lucky day. You look up at the rising sun. It does not warm you, but at least it does not demand you change clothes to fit the revolutionary aesthetic. You have no t-shirt, no socks, no spare pants, but you have resilience, a kind of spiritual fabric, wrapping you just enough to survive each season of beheadings. In Paris in the year 1793, you do not dress to express your personality. You dress to make sure you are not mistaken for an aristocrat, or worse, clean. You have finished the dressing part. Next comes labor, or more accurately, unpaid exhaustion for a country still figuring out how to make bread from dust. Are you ready? No need to answer. Just keep walking. When you fall, history might pause to notice, or it might not. You have just escaped your damp little room, dressed in clothes that seem to have been stitched together by the hand of famine itself, with a chunk of bread harder than cobblestones, and one gulp of soup flavored with suspicion still sitting in your gut. You take a breath, lift your head to the gray Paris sky, and whisper to yourself, "Time to go to work." To be precise, work to avoid starving. And more precisely, work to avoid being suspected of laziness, a counter-revolutionary crime dealt with swiftly by guillotine. Your job today. You have no idea. There are no contracts, no wages, no office. Only whatever you can find, fight for, win, or steal in an ethical way. You head toward the central market. Today, you plan to work as a water carrier, which means if luck is with you, someone will ask you to carry water from the river to their house in exchange for a moldy piece of cheese. That would count as a win. If not, then at least you got some exercise and a dirty look as thanks. You stand with a few dozen others. Everyone wears sun-bleached shirts holding dented tin buckets. You look at them. They look at you. No one speaks. All waiting for a surviving noblewoman post-land reform who needs water carried for her dog's bath. No one comes. You decide to switch gears, become a letter runner. You dig into your pocket. Still one white cloth left. You tie it to a stick and prop it beside a newsstand. Fast delivery insults not included. A man in a purple waistcoat approaches, his face wrinkled like a constitution still not ratified. Young man, deliver this letter to Rue des Morts. Hand it to Madame Louisette. Rue des Morts. Sounds like the street of the dead. Exactly. Near La Force prison. Near the guillotine. Will I be paid? Yes. With a smile and a chance to survive. You pause. Perhaps his smile is worth more than currency right now. You take the letter, slip it into your coat, run. Run past the old church, now smashed into a militia headquarters. Run past children playing kickball with a human skull. Run past the square where 3 heads fell this morning, the scent of blood still fresh, the flies still hosting their buffet. You arrive. Deliver the letter. No one thanks you. No one smiles. You turn to leave, and a soldier blocks your path. What are you doing here delivering a letter? To whom, Madame Louisette? That name is not on the civilian list. You try to explain. He stares at you. His eyes narrow like you are a multiple-choice question on a revolutionary loyalty exam. He leans in close and whispers, "Be careful." Every aimless step is a reason to lose your head. You swallow, bitter and vaguely flavored with this morning's bread. You turn away. Your heart pounds like a war drum. You survived, but still unemployed. You wander into a candle-making workshop. They need someone to cut wax. You volunteer. The jobs sit between 3 pots of hot wax and blunt knives shape cylinders and avoid being burned. You last 10 minutes. Burn a finger. The foreman tells you that you are too soft for the revolution. You are fired. You receive half a salted biscuit as payment. Noon. You sit beneath a bridge, hands dipped into the river to cool the burn. Above you, a group of militiamen argue whether gallows should be built from oak or ash wood. You smile bitterly. You cannot afford bread, but you are not dumb enough to laugh out loud. A woman approaches. Messy hair, dirty hands. "Can you help me carry firewood from the market to my home? I will give you a piece of cheese. It has molded for the 2nd time." You nod. Simple job. Clear reward. And most importantly, mold still counts as edible. You lift the bundle of firewood, heavy as the sins of the aristocracy. Each step is a groan from your back and a cheer from your empty stomach. You deliver the wood, receive the cheese, sniff, bite, your mouth, happy in a painful kind of way. You think maybe the revolution does not bring equality, but at least it teaches you how to chew whatever can be chewed. You end your day pushing a trash cart down the Boulevard Saint-Antoine, unpaid, just hoping someone tosses out a half-eaten apple. As the sun sets, you lie on a stone bench. No one invites you home. No one calls your name. You are just a moving shadow in history's machine. But you survived. You were not arrested, not executed, not starved into madness. And in Paris, 1793, that is the fullest definition of the word success. Tomorrow you will work again. Not for dreams, not for money. Just to keep your head connected to your neck. A very popular career goal during the French Revolution. You are tired, you are hungry, but you are still alive. For now, You have just dragged your body back from the job of carrying firewood in exchange for twice molded cheese, your mouth still tasting faintly of fermented fungus, when a familiar sound echoes through the gray afternoon. A bell. Not a church bell, not a ceremonial bell. It is the alarm bell, the manual version of a siren rung by hand, but ring it wrong and heads roll. You look up at the square. A crowd has gathered. Everyone stands, tall eyes fixed on the wooden platform. A man in a brown cloak, long hair, holding a book 3 times the size of his own head, is speaking loudly. We have broken free from the chains of superstition. The Republic has no room for God, only for reason. You recognize him. A former priest, now reborn as a propagandist of the cult of reason, a state-sanctioned religion invented by the revolutionary regime. You do not understand much. Yesterday, people were still going to Mass. Today, anyone who believes in God risks being locked up for monarchist nostalgia. You once saw an old woman arrested for secretly lighting a candle to pray for her son who died in battle. The charge promoting superstition. You glance toward the old church, the place where you once prayed as a child. Now it is the National Grain Reserve. A sign at the entrance reads, "Anyone praying within 5 meters will be considered a spy." You sigh, not because you are deeply religious, but because there is no one left to whisper to. Please do not let me die from this bread. You used to believe in God. Then the revolution came. Now you believe in whatever keeps you out of prison. You pass by a wall plastered with posters. God does not give you bread. The Revolutionary Committee can. Cult of reason, where thinking is holy. One more amen will be your last. You chuckle dryly. Religion is now a coat you are not allowed to wear, but cannot throw away either. Because if you believe, you are a reactionary. If you do not believe, you are not revolutionary enough. You recall last week's trial. An old clergyman, hands trembling, clutching a wooden crucifix, was convicted of plotting to restore theocracy. He was executed. Not for killing anyone, but for daring to believe in something not written in the Constitution. You slip into a narrow alley where people still whisper prayers. A group of old women sit pressed against a wall, fingers clutching rosary beads, heads bowed low. A militia guard walks by. They stop immediately, eyes on the ground as if even the cobblestones are watching. You want to ask, does faith require residency papers too? But you do not. Here, asking the wrong question is a death sentence without paperwork. You keep walking. You wander into the Temple of Reason, an old theater converted into a shrine to human intellect. There are no sacred icons inside. Only statues of half-naked women symbolizing liberty, reason, republic. You look up at the stage. A 17-year-old boy is giving a lecture on science democracy and how to boil water using a concave mirror. Everyone claps, not because they understand, but because not clapping is a sign of lacking revolutionary enthusiasm. You clap too. Even though your body feels hot, not from the lights, but because someone just stared at you for more than 3 seconds. In Paris today, a lingering gaze is a silent interrogation of loyalty. You leave the temple, step onto the street and see a drunk man shouting in the middle of an intersection, "I miss the Pope. I want to be baptized." 3 minutes later, he is thrown onto a wooden cart. No one stops it. No one says his name again. At night, you return to your little room. You light a candle, and immediately blow it out. Too much light makes neighbors think you are praying illegally. You lie down on the straw, staring at the ceiling. You remember what your mother used to say, believe in something. When you have nothing else, faith is the last thing you hold. Now you believe in walls thick enough to muffle your whispered prayers, neighbors who do not eavesdrop, bread that does not block your intestines. You do not know if God is still in Paris. You do not know if reason truly listens. But one thing you do know. In this city, faith is allowed to exist, as long as it does not show in your eyes. Religion is now a ghost in your mind, and politics is the knife at your throat. You trust no one. You believe in nothing, except for one thing. Tomorrow you must wake up early, because the revolution never sleeps, and the guillotine never tires. Evening settles over Paris, not with the romantic glow of a Monet sunset, though he has yet to become famous, but with a layer of fog tinged with the scent of gunpowder and dried blood. You have just hauled your body back from the candle workshop, sweat soaked through torn wool clinging to your flesh like a chemical curse, and you think to yourself, well, what else is missing to call this a perfect day? That is right. Entertainment. In modern times, entertainment means Netflix, Spotify going to pubs, or traveling to Italy for gelato. Here in the revolutionary year 1793, Paris offers a different kind of amusement: watching people die. You hear a voice echoing through the streets from a handheld speaker. Tonight's execution begins at 6 o'clock at Revolution Square, starring 2 former nobles, 1 fake priest, and a soup vendor accused of watering down his recipe. You see people pouring into the square as if heading to a fireworks show. They are dressed up, meaning their dresses have no holes, their coats do not reveal straw stuffing inside. Some bring stools, hard biscuits, even a cat. Children run about shouting, "Off with their heads! Off with their heads!" You are swept into the crowd like trash carried by water through the sewers. You do not want to go. But if you do not, you will be labeled lacking revolutionary spirit. And lacking spirit can quickly become lacking a head. You arrive. Revolution Square, once called Place Louis XV, now hosts the guillotine like a traveling stage. The wood stained dark red, though no one is sure if it is paint or blood. A group of soldiers stands guard, chatting like they are preparing to open a cafe. You squeeze into the crowd. An old woman hands you a burnt biscuit. Before you can refuse, she says, "To chew while the heads fall. Helps with the tension." You nod. Chew. Its flavor matches your mood. Dry, awkward, and slightly charred. A drum roll begins. The first condemned prisoner is brought forth. A woman. Silver hair. Slender figure. Someone whispers, "She used to be a nurse for the queen. Knew how to make chicken soup with turmeric. That is counter-revolutionary." You do not hear her scream. She just looks to the sky, lips moving, maybe in prayer, maybe singing. You are not sure. The guillotine slices through the air like steel shears ripping leather. Thud. A head falls. The crowd applauds. A stout man shouts, "Long live the revolution." You try to swallow your biscuit, now as chewy as the silence of history. The second, then the third. Heads fall like ripe fruit. You cannot recall their faces. Only the sound of blade meeting wood, cold, damp, like Paris after a rain of blood. You wonder, will anyone write this down? Will people someday call this popular culture? Beside you, a boy giggles. Maybe Mom will let me skip school tomorrow to watch more. You want to ask, do you know those people once had parents, once loved, once cooked badly, once feared the dark, just like you, but you do not ask, because at that moment a man turns to you, narrowing his eyes. Why so serious? Not enjoying it, not longing for the old regime, are you? You panic, shake your head quickly. No, I just skipped dinner. He nods. Ah, me too. Heads are falling, but bread is still missing. You both laugh, not out of joy, but because laughter is the last tool left to remind yourselves you are not yet made of stone. The execution ends. People clap once more, then disperse. Someone mutters, "Too few heads today." Another complains, "No one famous." Lacked excitement. You linger for a moment, not to reflect, but to return one last glance to the bodies being cleared away like compost. You turn, head to a small tavern, not to drink, but to hear rumors. There survivors gather, telling old jokes, debating who will die next week. You overhear word is General Danton's daughter is being watched now. Pierre got arrested yesterday for cursing while queuing for turnips, and Robespierre does look a bit pale lately, does he not? You do not join in. You sip water, pretending it is wine, then leave before the topic shifts to, who did not clap loudly enough today? You walk slowly home. On the way, a wandering musician sits playing a mandolin, singing, "O Paris, where heads fall with no blood, only cracks in forgotten hearts." You stop, pull out a boiled bean from your pocket, toss it into the torn hat before him. He nods. You nod back. No words, because in this city, the silent ones are often the ones who live the longest. Entertainment in Paris, 1793, is not about escaping reality. It is about staring death in the face and pretending to smile. You have watched enough, clapped enough, said nothing wrong. You have survived. Again, a small victory. But tomorrow there is another execution. And you know one thing for certain. No one gets vacation in a democracy where the guillotine runs on schedule. You have seen men beheaded. You have seen the elderly starve. You have seen children play mini guillotine with headless dolls. But you have seen nothing until you become a woman. Congratulations. In tonight's grim tale, you are a poor woman living in Paris in the year 1793, where each day you survive without being called a counter-revolutionary witch is a personal achievement worthy of your own chronicle. You wake up in a room just barely larger than a coffin. Your left arm cradles your infant child. Your right hand rests on your belly where the scar from birthing your third child has not yet healed. Your husband is dead shot for calling the bread a bit sour. That phrase was officially recorded as undermining the revolutionary spirit through grain-based metaphor. You do not cry. Crying went out of style after your first childbirth. You get up brush straw off your skirt. The only skirt you own, once white, now gray, like your trust in anything. The waistband is long gone. You tie it with rope. No undergarments, of course. You cannot afford cloth, let alone support. You do not wear makeup. Makeup is a luxury. Any woman with blush is accused of bourgeois nostalgia. You wash your hair with dirty water, not by choice, but because it rained yesterday and the leak in your roof dripped directly into the bucket. Your hair smells like firewood smoke, baby sweat, and the breath of helplessness. You go to the market carrying 3 wilted turnips, hoping to trade for a scrap of bread. The vendor eyes you from head to toe. His gaze lingers on a bruise near your ankle, something you cannot remember if you got from falling or being trampled during last week's bread line. He says, "A beautiful woman like you should be home raising children, weaving the revolution." You smile, not because of the compliment, but because you have only 3 teeth left, so any smile becomes dark comedy. You manage to trade for 1 onion and half a dried fish. The fish is missing its tail, likely borrowed on the way. You return home, boil a soup from onion fish, and rain puddle water. Your baby cries. You do not soothe. You hand it a wooden spoon to chew on, dreaming of breast milk that once flowed. You once dreamed of becoming a seamstress. Then the revolution came. Your sewing machine was smashed for being a symbol of capitalist production. You used to know how to read just a bit. Now you pretend you do not. Literate women are easily accused of being cultural spies. You used to embroider, your hands were skilled. Now you embroider wounds, sewing up torn trousers with rusty needles. You once loved. Now you try to remember that man's name and wonder if he has been executed too. You used to menstruate. Now it is gone along with nutrition and any sense of safety. You pass a group of women being dragged through the market. Their crime: hosting an herbal tea gathering in a private home. The verdict: organizing pre-revolutionary rituals. The outcome: guillotine. You lower your head, pull your skirt tighter, not for warmth, but so no one accuses you of dressing provocatively like an aristocrat's wife. You visit your best friend Louisette, once a midwife. Now she hides in a basement. Her crime keeping birth records possibly linked to calendars of old gods. You give her half an onion. She gives you a clean cloth for wiping the baby's mouth. You clean your child. He smiles. You nearly cry, but hold it back. Tears waste water. Water is for cooking. You return home hearing a voice shouting in the street. Republican women must live humbly, serve fully, and remain silent. You ask yourself, I live poor, I work, I give birth, I say nothing. What more is there? The answer arrives. A young girl with red hair is shoved onto a prisoner's cart. Her crime: singing an old love song in public. Her accuser: a neighbor. Evidence that melody was once favored by King Louis. You do not know her. But looking into her eyes before she is taken away, you feel one thing. All women in Paris are each other, only waiting for their turn. Night falls. You sit beside your child. The baby is asleep. You secretly retrieve a pencil hidden in a crack in the wall and write on a piece of scrap fabric. Today I did not die. Today I was not beheaded. Today I am still a mother. Tomorrow, unknown. You tuck it away. Lie down on the rotting straw. Hold your child. Eyes on the broken ceiling. Stars flicker. The wind bites. Soup smells linger, and the sound of the guillotine hums faintly in the distance. You think quietly, if I am gone tomorrow, let my child remember nothing. The revolution is for the future. But who protects the children in the present? Being a woman in Paris, 1793, is not living. It is surviving in silence, birthing pain, and raising hope between executions. You do not sleep yet, because if you sleep too deeply, they might think you are dead, and that would be a fatal mistake. You have made it through an entire day, waking in moldy straw, chewing bread, like bricks working until your hands blistered, watching heads fall like autumn leaves, and counting each breath as if it were the last possession you still owned. Now it is night. Paris is quiet in an unusual way. Not peaceful, but because the entire city is waiting for tomorrow's execution list. You lie on the floor, eyes open, not asleep. No one in Paris, 1793, truly sleeps. They merely rest between two nightmares. You shiver. Not from cold, you are used to the cold by now, but from a vague feeling that your name is being written this very moment onto a piece of paper that decides death. You recall the morning 3 days ago. The old man next door greeted you as you went out to fetch water. By noon, he was arrested. By nightfall, he was beheaded. His crime sighing during the revolutionary anthem. Here death requires no reason. It has become a social habit. You roll over. Your shoulder burns another sore from coarse wool rubbing raw flesh all day. If it becomes infected, you know you will not survive the week. No medicine, no doctor, only dried herbs and whispered prayers in the toilet. You remember your mother's death in childbirth, your sibling's death from eating rotten turnips, your former lover's death for swearing near a militia outpost. Death in Paris is not an end. It is a blank space filled each day by the shaky handwriting of a tired clerk. You sit up, look toward the door. In the distance, the flickering light of the guard's campfire. You hear whispers, faint laughter. Maybe they are telling a joke about an aristocrat who slipped on the scaffold and accidentally beheaded himself. Humor in its most terrifying form. You retrieve the leftover piece of bread hidden under the straw. You do not eat it. You take it down the street and place it beside the body of a dog that died 3 days ago. You share what is left while waiting for what will soon be missing. Back home, you sit beside your sleeping child. He is still breathing, a soft cough, but steady. You think, if I die first, who will care for him? If he dies first, what reason do I have to live? You pick up a rusty needle, begin mending your shirt. The needle pricks your finger. Blood oozes. You lick the wound. Not because it hurts, but because blood is the only thing still warm in the Paris night. Somewhere the old church bell rings, once hoarse and hollow. Once a call to faith. Now it sounds like the dying heartbeat of the world. You write a small line on the wall with stove charcoal, I am still alive. But I am no longer myself. You read it again and again. You do not cry. Not because you are strong, but because tears require nourishment and you lack both. Then you think of death. Not as an end, but as the only logical exit. You imagine tomorrow someone calls your name. You are bound, dragged into the square. People shout, "Traitor." You do not resist. You nod. As long as they let you eat a boiled egg first, something you have not tasted in 3 years. You imagine your head falling. Quick, painless. Maybe, maybe not. You imagine applause, then silence. You are tossed into a mass grave. No name on a stone. No one remembers. No one speaks of you. But no one hurts you anymore either. And in that moment, you feel light. It is not that you want to die. You just no longer want to endure. You return to lie beside your child. Rest your head on the straw. Cover yourself with burlap. And whisper to yourself, "If I do not wake tomorrow, at least I survived today." A breeze slips through the cracks in the wall. It carries the faint smell of onion soup from someone's kitchen. You are no longer hungry. You just feel still. And you sleep. No dreams, no fear. Just a temporary pause in being. Death in Paris. 1793. Does not arrive as an enemy. It comes like an old acquaintance tapping your shoulder in the crowd, whispering, "That was enough, was it not? You have lived. You have hurt. You have swallowed hunger, fear, and even your own voice. You are no hero. No statue will be made for you. No story will be told. But if someday someone finds the charcoal mark on that gray wall and reads the words you wrote on your last night, perhaps they will understand. To survive sometimes is the quietest yet most beautiful form of resistance. If all civilizations are castles made of sand, then Herodotus was the first to try to record every single grain. Before him, there was no history, only myth and blood tales passed around the campfire that soon faded into nothingness. Victory belonged to the survivors, while truth was often the first to die. And then a child was born. Not in a palace, not within a sacred temple, but in a city at the crossroads of Greek light and Persian shadow, a place called Halicarnassus, nestled on the shores of the Aegean Sea. There, in the 5th year of the 5th century before Christ, a boy entered the world. No one could have known that this child would one day become the first to ask, "Does history have a soul?" While other children were enamored with rhetoric or practiced throwing javelins. Herodotus sat quietly in the corner of the marketplace where sailors returned from Egypt, Persia, India, and spoke of distant lands, senseless wars, and kings who believed in dreams. He did not interrupt. He did not question. He simply listened and remembered. He realized the world was a labyrinth of stories, each people a pathway, each event a fork in the road. But no one stopped to draw a map. No one recorded anything so that children in the future might understand. Why did all of this happen? He grew up in a world split in two on one side. Greece, the civilization of liberty and debate. On the other, Persia, the empire of order and strength. And between these two forces, blood fire and fractured stories. His father was Greek, but Halicarnassus lay under heavy Persian influence. The boy bore within him two cultural bloodlines, two ways of seeing the world, and because of that, he chose no side. He chose to record. What he carried was the silent pain of hearing people speak of war as if it were destiny. He saw the eyes of the mother who had lost her child, the soldier who had lost his friend, the king who had lost his empire, each voice calm as if sorrow were merely a footnote. Herodotus listened and grieved for the world. He made a vow if no one would record the truth, then he would be the first. Not to accuse, not to glorify, only to ensure no one would be forgotten. Every child is born with a flame. The flame of Herodotus was memory. When he first left his homeland, he carried not luggage, but questions. Did the Scythians truly drink the blood of their enemies? Did King Xerxes really lash the sea? Were the pyramids truly built by slaves? He did not want answers from books. He wanted to touch the earth, to look into eyes, to feel the stories. Because for Herodotus, truth does not lie in victory, but in the memories of those whom no one ever thinks to ask. People often imagine a historian as someone who sits in a library copying down what has already been proven. But Herodotus did not want to repeat what had been told. He wanted to hear it for himself, to see it with his own eyes, to understand it at its roots. And so he stepped out of safety and walked toward the fractures of the world. There were no accurate maps, no escorts, no title to protect him. Only a solitary traveler carrying the belief that if what I hear is true, then this world is not fragmented. It is woven together by stories, and I will be the one to follow the thread. And so, Herodotus journeyed. He moved like a sleepwalker through reality, like a man summoned by the past. He came to Egypt, a land where pyramids rose like memories turned to stone, a place where people said the Nile flowed from the heavens, and the god Ra lifted the sun each morning. Herodotus did not deny these legends. He listened, he recorded, and then he asked, who truly built the pyramids? Why did they do it? He went to Babylon, a city that glittered like a dream with its hanging gardens and harsh laws. There he heard of Hammurabi, the man who carved laws into stone. And he realized power does not lie only in the sword it lies in who has the right to tell the story. He traveled to Scythia, a place where people lived on horseback and were said to drink the blood of their enemies. Herodotus did not fear them. He sat among them, listened to their tales of wind of grasslands, of deaths that were never mourned, and he wondered, perhaps savagery is only the label given by those who do not understand. To Herodotus, no people were barbarians, only civilizations yet to be heard. In every land he visited, he recorded what others found strange, a tribe that never told lies, a people who lived by consuming the ashes of their ancestors, rituals of bizarre sacrifices, prophetic dreams. Not to make history entertaining, but to show that every culture has its reasons for being. He became a living memory, not merely recording events, but capturing how people perceived those events. When Egyptians spoke of a great flood, they spoke of the wrath of the god Sobek. When Greeks spoke of the same flood, they spoke of the overflowing mechanisms of rivers. And Herodotus, rather than choosing one version, recorded both as if inviting future generations to decide for themselves. He began to see that truth was never one-sided. Truth is a crystal reflecting differently depending on where the light strikes. At times, he was doubted. In some places, he was rejected. A man with no local gods, no weapons, only questions, was the most suspicious of all. But he did not stop. Because each answer led to 10 more questions, and each puzzle piece brought him closer to the full picture of humanity. And so he wrote. Not on a computer, not on printed paper, but by hand on parchment, each line of ink as if written in blood. What he heard, he wrote. What he doubted, he marked with a question. What he did not understand, he still recorded as a door not yet opened. Because Herodotus believed that what is not understood today may become tomorrow's truth. He was not a preacher. He was a messenger to the future. To let them ask, why did this people disappear? Why did that empire collapse? Why, from the same event, does each person tell a different story? His journey was not written in metals. There were no chariots, no welcoming ceremonies, only dust and the skeptical gazes of locals. But he kept going, because he understood if no one crosses the borders, then what humanity knows about itself will always be only half the story. And so, Herodotus continued. Across cold lands, across barren deserts, across even the boundaries within himself. For truth sometimes does not lie out there, it lies in how we see the world. We call him the father of history. But at the time he was simply a man trying to recover the voice of humankind. Not to judge, not to glorify, only to remember. And sometimes one person remembering is enough to keep history from being forgotten again. Not every empire is born of victory, and not every nation survives by blood. But there are moments in history when blood is the only language used to write the future. Herodotus understood that. He was not a warrior, nor was he a king. But he lived in the shadow of a war that divided the world in two, the war between Persia and Greece. It was not merely two armies facing each other. It was two souls, two ways of life, two ways of seeing humanity. On one side stood the Persian Empire, vast, steady, unified, with roads as long as destiny, where commands traveled faster than shadows. They believed in order. They believed that humans were born to serve something greater than themselves. On the other side were the Greek city-states, chaotic, small, divided. But within their hearts burned the flame of liberty. Every citizen was a warrior, a philosopher, a storyteller. They argued until exhaustion. But when freedom was threatened, they stood as one. That war did not begin with swords. It began with humiliation. The Persians sent envoys to the Greek city-states demanding submission. Some agreed. But in Athens and Sparta, the envoys were thrown into wells and pits. The answer was simple. If you want earth and water, go down there and take it. Herodotus did not write history by counting the dead. He wrote it through the details of the soul. He told of Marathon, where the Greeks, fewer than 1/3 the size of the Persian army, defeated an invincible force. Not because they were stronger, but because they fought as if their entire culture stood behind them, waiting to be erased. He told of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off tens of thousands of Persians, a certain death. But they stayed, not to win, but to prove that something is stronger than fear, that something is an ideal. He told of Salamis, where fragile wooden ships danced on the sea, deceiving the mighty Persian fleet, and sinking not only warships, but also an empire's belief in its own invincibility. Herodotus gathered stories from the survivors, from widows who lost husbands, from veterans who lost limbs, from deserters and those who surrendered. He did not build monuments for heroes. He merely recorded what they said. And sometimes in the most trembling voices, history became most real. He did not glorify the Greeks. He spoke of their arrogance, their divisions, their ambitions. But he also saw that this chaos was their strength. Because the Greeks did not fight to preserve an empire, they fought to preserve a soul. Nor did he vilify the Persians. He wrote of kings like Cyrus and Darius, rulers who were both wise and ruthless, who believed in law and divine destiny. He sought to understand them to avoid the eternal trap of dividing the world into us and them. Herodotus wrote history as though he were a priest restoring the souls of the dead to their rightful place in the cosmos. Each page of his work is a philosophical question in disguise. Who truly wins? The one who survives, or the one who is remembered? Because without him, Leonidas would be just a name in ashes. Without him, Marathon would be nothing more than a dry meadow. Without him, Salamis would be an island no one remembered. Herodotus did not stand on the battlefield, but he entered a fiercer battle, still the battle against forgetting. And with every drop of ink, every paragraph, every recollection, he turned history into epic. Not just so the Greeks could remember who they were, but so humanity would remember this every time freedom is threatened. There are those who rise not because victory is certain, but because they refuse to kneel. Herodotus did not stop after the war. He continued to write to ask questions. But he knew from this point on, history was no longer a faded painting. It was a story, and the storyteller was him. Herodotus was not born to lead a revolution. He did not raise a spear. He did not overthrow a dynasty. But every line he wrote, every detail he chose to record, was the most dangerous act a person can commit against power. He asked questions, because not everyone wants to be remembered truthfully. There is something about kings that makes them believe they are above history, that if they win, they will be cast in stone. If they lose, they can find a way to be erased. But Herodotus refused to accept that. He sought the truth behind the glory, the fate beneath the crown. He wrote about Xerxes, the mighty Persian emperor, who once ordered the sea to be whipped for daring to defy him with its waves. To Herodotus, that was not mere madness. It was the tragic symbol of power that forgets its limits. He told the story of Croesus, the king of Lydia, the wealthiest man in the ancient world, who once asked the wise man, Solon, "Who is the happiest man?" Only to be met with a painful answer, "We cannot know until you are dead." Croesus would later lose everything, and in doing so became the answer to his own question. These stories in the hands of Herodotus were not just history, they were warnings. Kings, queens, generals, they believed power to be eternal. But Herodotus knew power is an illusion, repeating the same patterns, the same price. And that price is always oblivion. He gathered omens, the dreams of kings, the prophecies of Delphi. The instincts dismissed the signs, laughed off all pointing toward inevitable ends. Not because he believed in superstition, but because he saw clearly humans are not led only by reason, but by pride and delusion. And history is the result of those things. Herodotus was not a historian in the ordinary sense. He was an analyst of the souls of rulers, and he wrote with the eyes of an outsider understanding yet unwilling to forgive. And for that he was distrusted. Some accused him of fabricating. Others called him a teller of folklore, not a true historian. Kings bristled at seeing their names beside their failures. Those in power tried to alter the truth, but he refused. Because he understood if history becomes the tool of the powerful, then no one can trust memory anymore. He did not write to please. He did not write to be praised. He wrote as if fighting against a system of erasure. the erasure of those whose souls were not crowned, whose tragedies were not inscribed in royal chronicles. Perhaps he was lonely, perhaps he was afraid, but he kept writing, not out of pride, but from a simple belief. One day someone will read what I have written, and they will see that whether victor or defeated in the end, humans are still just human. Herodotus did not only write about those who held power, he wrote about ordinary people, the ones who lost their homes, the soldiers who died without names, the ones who carried stories no one bothered to hear. And in doing so, he became the voice of those without power, but not without worth. His history was not clean, not orderly, not satisfying to anyone. But that is why it has lasted more than 2,000 years, because he did not write history as a perfect painting. He wrote it as a crack through kingdoms, through victories, through all things thought to be eternal. And from that crack, the light of truth, however faint, still shines. No pen is truly neutral, and Herodotus, though he never claimed to oppose power, became the most dangerous kind of man, one who dared to write the truth in an age of erasure. Not all liars are punished, but sometimes it is the truth-teller who is put on trial. Herodotus never imagined that the words he gathered from distant shores, deserts, citadels, and temples would one day make him a suspect. But he forgot one thing: the world does not hate distortion. The world fears the truth. What he wrote did not please everyone. The Greeks accused him of praising the enemy. The Persians claimed he distorted their history. Scholars said he invented tales. Rulers accused him of sowing doubt. And even some of those who once told him their stories eventually said, "You did not understand us." And so Herodotus was isolated not by chains, but by silence. No one stopped him from writing, but no one gave him a place. No court patronized him. No library copied his work. No one wanted to become a character in the lines he refused to embellish. They began to call him the Great Liar. They mocked his tales of men riding whales of tribes who never lied, of myths interwoven with events. They did not understand, or chose not to, that he did not write to convince. He wrote to preserve the spirit of an age that without such effort would vanish into the dust. In the halls where he once read his manuscripts, now only echoes remained. In the plazas where listeners once gathered, now only passers-by who paid no mind. Yet he kept writing, not for recognition, but because only in writing could he remain himself. No one knew how much he suffered. He never wrote of it. But the loneliness was felt in the fading frequency of his notes, in the growing solemnity of his tone, in the lines that spoke of the lost of fallen empires, of what once seemed eternal and now had turned to sand. Perhaps he began to understand telling the truth would not make him immortal. It would only make him invisible in a world that found comfort in lies. But within that silence, he found another voice, not applause, but the echo of the future. Herodotus began to write for those not yet born, for those like him who would never accept forgetting as a natural state. He knew he no longer belonged to his time, but he believed each word he left behind was a seed that might bloom in a different century, in a time no longer afraid of truth. He no longer wrote like a storyteller, but like a keeper of fire. A fire that did not blaze, did not dazzle. It smoldered, burned slowly, as if waiting for a single gust of wind to set the world alight. The world went on without him. But each new war, each new kingdom, each new mistake repeated the same patterns, he had already warned of. And perhaps that is why his histories, though cast aside, have never stopped being true. People may reject him, but they cannot make him disappear. No one knows exactly where he died. Some say he passed in Athens, where he once read his epics. Others claim he died in Thuria forgotten. But what matters is not where he died, but where he lives on in every person who asks a question. And each time a historian begins research, a journalist investigates a fact, a filmmaker retells an old story through new eyes somewhere, Herodotus returns. No one remembers his face, but everyone knows who he was. No one holds his original manuscripts, but nearly every civilization now tells stories in the way he first envisioned. Herodotus left no empire, no descendants, no school named in his honor. But he left behind the strangest of all legacies, honesty in the form of a story. And for a world that once considered truth dangerous, that perhaps is the quietest yet greatest revolution of all. If there was one thing that made Herodotus different from all others of his time, it was not the number of miles he traveled, nor the events he recorded. It was the way he refused to divide the world into true and untrue. To him, there was no firm boundary between history and myth, between what happened and what was told. Because he understood human beings do not live by events, they live by the way they tell those events. In his writings, it is not difficult to find people flying through the skies, men riding monsters, gods appearing in dreams, temples, weeping blood volcanoes, singing songs made of ash. Critics called these exaggerations fictional embellishments, but Herodotus never defended them, because for him such things did not need to be believed only to be understood. When an Egyptian spoke of the Nile as the tears of the goddess Isis, Herodotus did not refute it. He simply asked, "Why do they need to believe this?" Because sometimes the truth does not make the world easier to bear, but myth can. And so he built a map unlike any other, not with coordinates, but with beliefs. On that map, there were people who lived in eternal darkness, never having seen the sun, and so they lived within the philosophy of shadows. There were tribes who never lied, not because of moral superiority, but because in their language the concept of falsehood had never been created. There were lands where war never happened, because the people believed the souls of the dead would return to claim justice not in the afterlife, but in the dreams of the murderer. Herodotus never asked us to believe these stories, but he asked us to place ourselves in the shoes of the storyteller. Because when a people are erased by war, the only thing left behind is how they once described the world. The world of Herodotus was not ruled by logic. It was a place where imagination was the gateway to truth. To him, mythology was the collective psychology of a civilization. It was how a people healed their fears or justified their actions. If the Greeks imagined Zeus unleashing storms when they broke the law, it was not just a story, it was a moral warning wrapped in imagery. And if the Persians believed their emperor was the embodiment of light, it was not merely arrogance, it was the fragility behind the desire to rule justly. Herodotus built a storytelling universe where readers did not need to choose sides, only to choose how to listen. To him, the storyteller was not a judge, not someone who cleanses facts, but someone who preserves what the world wishes to forget. Sometimes people asked him, "Are these things true?" And he smiled without answering, because he knew truth is not in the details, It is in the feeling left behind when the story ends. He did not write with faith in facts, but with reverence for collective imagination. His passages about gods were not to spiritualize history, but to show that everywhere human beings need something to bow to when reason can no longer save them. The greatest thing Herodotus did was not to record what others did not know. It was to preserve what others thought not worth keeping. Because when you erase a people's legends, you do not make history cleaner, you only make it less human. And history without emotion is nothing more than a silent list of dates. To Herodotus, history was the sorrowful love song of humankind, flawed, mistaken, illusory, but the only love song we are able to sing again. He never tried to make the world believe everything he wrote. He only hoped for one thing, that we would listen as if these stories might save someone's soul. And if one day you read Herodotus and come across something too strange to be real, pause and ask, could it be? This is true. But in another world our ancestors once believed was real, because perhaps that world still exists in memory, in storytelling, in the hearts of those who have not forgotten how humankind once looked to the sky and believed the gods looked back. There was one thing Herodotus understood more clearly than anyone of his time: no one can ever record all of history. Not because memory has limits, but because history never pauses long enough to be written down. And so he wrote, not as someone trying to conclude the world, but as one who knew he would always be writing in the dark, facing a light he would never reach. His work had no title when it began. It was simply scrolls of parchment, scattered passages stitched together by a belief: if I do not write, then no one will. Later, people would call it histories, not in the modern sense of history, but in the ancient sense, inquiries. An uncertain journey without final answers, but with a heart that kept asking, why did this happen? The book does not follow chronological order. It follows emotions, follows lands, follows the way the world was broken into fragments of memory. There is Persia, Egypt, Scythia, Lydia, Athens, Sparta. There are kings, priests, sages, and even the nameless to whom Herodotus devoted entire sections for a single fleeting story. He wrote as if the world were a dream that only he remembered. And that book was how he called everyone to awaken. No one commissioned him. No one commanded him. There was no patron, no academy, no students taking notes. Only one man camped within the memory of humankind, rebuilding what was being swept away by the wind. They say he once traveled to Athens, a city where philosophy was loved, free speech revered, and public readings celebrated. Herodotus stood in the plaza and read the first pages of histories to a crowd expecting a hero. But they heard no Achilles, no Hector, no Odysseus. They heard of Croesus, of Cyrus, of Egyptians burying cats with more ceremony than humans. They heard what the world had truly endured, not what poetry had idealized. Some laughed. Some were puzzled. Some remained silent. But one thing was certain: they had never heard anyone tell stories like that before. Herodotus did not give them triumphant gods. He gave them lost men. There were no eternal victories, no absolute morals, only human beings trying to understand each other amid chaos. And that is what gave his book its quiet greatness. It did not rally. It did not judge. It did not preach. It did only one thing: It opened a door. No one knows exactly when Herodotus died. There was no will, no shrine, no academy bearing his name. Only hand-copied manuscripts passed from reader to student to writer through centuries across shores, through empires. And strangely, that book did not end with its last page. It lived on. In every human attempt to understand why history repeats, in every question of whether collective memory can offer healing, in every moment when someone stands among ruins, looks around and asks, "How did we get here?" Not everyone likes that book. It is too messy for those who want order, too neutral for those who want righteousness, too questioning for those who seek absolute faith. But it exists as an unfinished portrait of humanity painted through the eyes of someone who chose no side. Herodotus did not die as a legend. He died as a man in a world that never fully understood him. But every time that book is opened, he lives again in every question, every note, every silence that the reader must fill in themselves. That book is not the ending of one man's life. It is the beginning of how humankind remembers itself. There are deaths that happen quietly, without weeping, without tombstones, without processions. But there are also deaths that open the door to another kind of life, not one of flesh and blood, but of collective memory. Herodotus died such a death. No one knows for certain where he rests. Some say he died in Athens. Others say in Thurii. No statues were raised, no portraits carved into marble. And yet, strangely, people still feel his presence. Not in the flesh, but in the way the world began to learn how to tell stories. From the early years of the 4th century before Christ to this very day, one question has echoed across time like a voice from the ancient world. Who is the father of history? People do not hesitate Herodotus. Not because he was the first to write things down. Not because everything he wrote was correct. But because he set forth a principle that the world, even after 1,000 years, is still trying to understand, that history does not lie in what happened, but in how we tell what happened. Every historian after him, whether the cold precision of Thucydides, the sharp insight of Tacitus, the deep analysis of Ibn Khaldun, or the philosophical lens of Gibbon, began with the open-ended question that Herodotus left behind. What builds a civilization? What causes its fall? And can anything be learned from the ashes? Not just historians. Journalists, filmmakers, writers of historical fiction, directors who retell old stories to illuminate present darkness. They may not mention his name, but every time they choose to remember instead of forget, Herodotus is reborn. He was the first model of a storyteller who took no side but stood for memory. He did not rally. He did not mock. He simply recorded with a quiet compassion, saying, "This is what we once were. Remember." Today's world, with its supercomputers, artificial intelligence, satellite maps, and vast data, still stands before the same old question: who are we without our stories? And in that question, Herodotus becomes more modern than ever, because he taught us that no data point is more important than experience. No statistic more vivid than human memory. No archive more powerful than a story told at the right time in the right way with the heart. He did not write history like a report. He wrote as if trying to preserve the warmth of each culture before it disappeared. He did not seek truth like a scientist. He embraced contradictions, differences, uncertainties, and said, "This too is part of being human." And that ultimately was his victory. Not a victory on the battlefield, not a victory over his critics, but a victory over the death of memory. Herodotus lives again each time someone stands in front of tragedy and asks, "Has this happened before?" He is present. Each time a filmmaker tries to resurrect the soul of the past, frame by frame. He walks beside every writer who rewrites old tales to understand the present. He whispers in the ear of those who refuse to accept forgetting. And in a world where information can be distorted, truth can be bought, and memory erased with a single update, Herodotus is a reminder that not everything deserves to be forgiven into oblivion. He once wrote, "I record these things so that no great achievement of humankind will be lost to time." There is no simpler statement and no legacy more enduring than that. Because in a world that forgets faster than ever, a lone storyteller abandoned, misunderstood, ignored, might still be the only thing left standing when everything else falls. Herodotus, the first storyteller, did not die. He is only waiting somewhere within an unopened page, within an unwritten dream, within a question humanity has yet to fully ask. And when we are ready to listen, he will still be telling the tale. In a place where the sky feels closer than the earth, where clouds brush against your face like a thin veil stretched across memory, there lies a body of water motionless amidst the Andes Mountains. Titicaca. Its name echoes like an ancient song, half human, half divine, half water, half fire. It is not only the highest navigable lake in the world, not only the lifeblood of millions. It is a fragile boundary between mythology and geography. The lake rests at an altitude of 12,507 feet, or about 3,812 meters, so high that the clouds do not drift across the sky, but instead slither along the water's surface. Yet the most peculiar thing of all, it does not reflect the blue sky. Visitors come here with cameras, drones, satellite maps, hoping to capture that sacred moment when sky and water merge. But when they look into the lake, what appears is not nature, but emotion. Cold, silent, and profoundly deep. There is something in these waters that tightens the heart. Perhaps it is the altitude or the thin air or the collective memory of a civilization that once passed through here, then vanished without a word. The Inca called this place the navel of the world. According to their legend, Viracocha, the god who created the universe, rose from the very heart of Lake Titicaca to create the sun, the moon, and the first human beings. On an island in the middle of the lake, Isla del Sol, he made the sun rise from the waters so that light could have a name for the first time. Where else on earth has the sun ever been born from a lake? Where else has water been more than a reflection, but a source? The Inca believed that everything began at Titicaca. Not because it is vast, not because it is high, but because it keeps secrets. That is why the ancient empires did not build grand temples on the coasts or erect palaces on the plains, but chose Titicaca as the keeper of their origin myths. Yet the strangest tale is this. While legend says the sun rose from the lake, other stories speak of a city that sank into it. The Aymara people who have lived around the lake for centuries tell of a city named Huanacu, or Pe Titicala, an ancient metropolis where gods once lived alongside men. But then humanity grew arrogant, forgot its gratitude to the divine, and so the entire city was submerged in a single night when the gods withdrew their light. nothing remained. Only the lake. Only the sound of bells echoing at dawn. Only a strange flickering light in the mist that no one can explain. Local fishermen say they have seen the shadows of stone pillars beneath the surface when the water is exceptionally clear and the sky perfectly still. They speak of recurring dreams where they swim downward, open the stone door of a house, see a table still set, and a child sleeping who never wakes up. Scientists once laughed, but in recent years, underwater archaeological expeditions have begun to reveal something, almost like an apology from history. Beneath the lake, they discovered stone walls, ancient altars, fragments of pottery unlike anything from known Incan culture, all buried deep under the water where mythology once spoke of a lost city. Could it be true? Or is it simply that humans will always cling to wonder in order to escape the weight of reality? We do not know. But Titicaca, with its biting altitude and unceasing winds, does not feel like a place one visits to see a lake. It is a place of sensations, where water becomes liquid memory, where the air carries the scent of past centuries, where each island whispers an incomplete sentence, and where time does not flow sideways but sinks straight down. You may stand at the lake's edge, watching the reed boats of the Euros people drift by, listening to the paddles tap gently, like the heartbeat of the earth. You may place your hand in the water, but it will not feel cold like a glacier lake. It will feel soft, like touching a memory that has not yet frozen. Titicaca does not reflect the blue sky. It reflects a longing without a name, a sense that something once magnificent happened here and then quietly disappeared like a gentle curse. Before humankind carved into stone, before they gave names to rivers and mountains, before the sun was called Inti, or the moon, Mama Killa Lake Titicaca was already there, not as a lake, but as the eyes of the world just awakening. The Inca did not call this place a lake. They called it the place where gods emerged. According to their oldest legends in the beginning of time, the world was nothing but darkness and water. There was no light, no people, only silence, cold, deep, and infinite. Until Viracocha, the god who created the universe, rose from the bottom of Lake Titicaca, not from the sky, not from the mountain peaks, but from the water. A god in a white headdress, bearing a sword of light, walking step by step across the windless lake to create the sun, the moon, the stars, and the first human beings. It was no coincidence that all things essential to life, light-time creation, began from that place. In the imagination of the Andean people, Titicaca was the womb of the world. It was not merely a reservoir. It was a birthplace. The Inca believed that the first two divine beings were born here, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, children of the sun god Inti. They were sent forth from Titicaca to bring light to the world, to found Cusco, and to lay the foundation for the great Inca Empire. And they did not rise from dry land. They sailed from the lake to the earth. Their birthplace was a real island, Isla del Sol, the island of the sun, a small protrusion from the water like an ancient forehead emerging from memory. Here the Inca built sacred structures, temples to the sunstone altars, stairways that seemed to touch the heavens. They did not build with cement, but with absolute precision, Stones fitted so tightly a blade could not pass between them. And they did not build to boast. They built to remember that the source of power did not come from war, but from the water. To the ancient Andean people, the world was not divided the way we think sky, earth, water, but flowed together like three breaths within one body. Water did not merely reflect the sky, it was part of the sky. And stone was not only for standing upon, but for listening to the voices of gods echoing from beneath the earth. That is why their most important temples were never built in dry places, always near water, always near lakes. And of all lakes, only Titicaca was the supreme sanctuary. They did not call the god the sky. They called him the one from the lake. They did not look upward to find the Creator. They looked down into the gently rippling surface of the water. Ancient rituals are still held every year on Isla del Sol in villages surrounding the lake. Andean priests called yatiri still offer coca leaves, corn liquor, and sacred fire to the lake, as if speaking to an old person sleeping with closed eyes who still hears everything. Why would an entire civilization place its creation myth upon the water? Perhaps because water is the one thing that cannot be held, that cannot be grasped, that reflects all things but keeps none, and that is the very nature of time. Titicaca is memory in motion. It cannot be held, but it cannot be erased. When the Spanish arrived here in the 16th century, they tried to destroy the rituals, smash the temples, and build churches atop ancient foundations. But there was one thing they could not do: dry the lake. And so the mythology did not die. It simply sank deeper, beneath the surface of the water, waiting. Not every city is built on land. Some cities, like Regret, are raised from stone, then swallowed by water. Lake Titicaca was once the cradle of Incan mythology. But when one dives deeper into older legends, the stories are not about light, but about punishment. About a proud, magnificent city that vanished in a single night. Its name changes depending on the people who tell the story: Wanaku Pe Titicaca, or simply the sunken city. They say it once stood tall in the middle of the lake, with white stone walls, temples gilded in gold, even bridges connecting islands, like a web of stone stretched across the water. In that city, people no longer feared the gods. They challenged them, offered false sacrifices, shattered ancient idols. And then one night, the lake opened its mouth. No wind, no storm, just a single cracking sound. And then the earth gave way. The water rose, swallowing everything: palaces, watchtowers, laughter, and bells. The lake closed over as if nothing had ever existed. But from that day forward, whenever the mist hangs heavy, people hear echoes beneath the waves. Elders still tell children if you sit silently by the lake shore at dawn, you might see flickers of light under the surface, like torches still burning in forgotten temples. Some fishermen swear they have seen domes of stone casting shadows through the clear water. Others speak of stairways leading down into the depths. Whether it is myth or ancestral memory, Lake Titicaca has become an unopened museum. And then, one day, it was no longer just legend. In the year 2000, a group of archaeologists originally inspired by Jacques Cousteau and later continued by Peruvian and Bolivian scientific teams began to explore the lakebed. They were not searching for myths. They were looking for geological traces, fossils, and sediment. But at a depth of over 65 feet, or about 20 meters near the Copacabana Peninsula, they discovered large stone walls deliberately arranged square foundations and structures resembling temples. Most striking of all, they found a semicircular construction, a design typically reserved for rituals of the Tiahuanaco civilization, a pre-Incan culture that flourished long before Cusco rose. Along with it came pottery shards, small figurines, and ritual offerings. Among them a carved stone statue of a kneeling llama, its eyes closed as if begging for forgiveness. This was no longer a tale. It was evidence. Could Wanaku, the legendary city, have been real? Could it have existed, thrived, and then been submerged not by divine wrath, but by tectonic shifts, landslides, or ancient climate change? Scientists remain cautious. They do not claim to have found the mythical city. But cultural historians, mythologists, and the people who live around the lake, they need no confirmation. To them, every shard of pottery pulled from the water is a message returned. Returned from the lake bed. Returned from oblivion. And perhaps the more important question is this: why do all the cultures surrounding Titicaca preserve the same story, a glorious city? An act of arrogance, a night of reckoning, and a descent into silence. Perhaps it is not a historical event, but a shared metaphor. Wanaku is the symbol of human ambition breaking the balance. When a civilization forgets its connection to nature, nature will reclaim. Not with thunder, but with silence. Lake Titicaca does not need to scream. It only needs to submerge. And beneath that depth, there is more than stone. There are memories suppressed, hidden, denied. That city, if it truly existed, is not just an archaeological question. It is a mirror held up to every empire that believed itself eternal. No one destroyed it. No army surrounded it. Yet it disappeared, fallen into a place that no one can ever rebuild. Because the greatest loss is not the loss of land. It is the loss of a place in human memory. If Titicaca is a mirror of the cosmos, then it does not only hold a sunken city beneath its surface, it also holds empires drifting across the water. Not all kingdoms are built on stone. Some civilizations, refusing to cling to land, choose instead to live among waves, reeds, and the gentle sway of impermanence upon the lake. In such a place, walls are not built, but identities are. Tiahuanaco, those who touched the sky with stone. Long before the Inca, before Cusco even existed, the lands surrounding Lake Titicaca were the heart of an ancient civilization. Tiahuanaco, also known as Tiwanaku. No one knows where they came from. No one fully understands how they built stone structures weighing hundreds of tons fitted so precisely they appear to have flowed from a single block. Near the lake now, within modern-day Bolivia, there still stand the gate of the sunstone carvings of the god Viracocha and altars used in sacred rituals. Every structure aligns with astronomical order in harmony with earth, sky, and water. Tiahuanaco did not build fortresses. They built ceremonial centers, not for defense, but for understanding the rhythms of the heavens. Lake Titicaca was not merely a landscape, it was a spiritual axis. A place where emperors, priests, and commoners alike would gaze into the water to understand that true existence does not rest on stone, but endures through faith. Uros, a people without a motherland. But if Tiahuanaco was a kingdom of stone, then the Uros are a kingdom of water. The Uros are an indigenous people who live right on the surface of Lake Titicaca, not on land, but on floating islands made from totora reeds, a plant that grows densely around the lake. These reeds, light, flexible, yet strong, form the material from which the Uros construct their entire world floors, boats, shelters, even sacred figures. Each island is a living organism requiring constant reinforcement, cared for like the body of a beloved relative. Why choose to live on water? There are many theories. Some say the Uros were driven into the lake by ancient kingdoms fleeing from war. Others speak of a legend claiming the Uros descend from the earliest people, those who belonged to no land, who feared no cold, who needed no fire because they had black blood. Whatever the truth, the Uros turned water into home. They do not farm. They fish, hunt waterfowl, and welcome the morning mist as part of a daily ritual. They do not raise pillars, but they have stood strong for centuries. Despite war, invasion, and climate change, the floating reed islands still drift like the heartbeat of a civilization that never died. When you step onto a Uros island, you will not see palaces or walls, only the grandeur of impermanence. Every footstep feels soft, yielding as if the earth itself is breathing. And there, upon the vast surface of the lake, where sky and water blur into one, they own nothing but time. A different philosophy of life. No need to possess, only to drift. While European empires fought over every inch of land, every river, every vein of gold, the people around Lake Titicaca understood something profound. Nothing truly belongs to anyone. Earth may crumble, cities may sink, thrones may fall, but water is always moving, and so those who learn to drift with it are the ones who remain. The Uros do not write history, but in the way they weave reeds into rafts, in the way they live quietly amidst the mist, they leave behind an epic without words, that to exist is not to resist the laws of nature, but to learn how to live within them. The Uros do not carve their names into stone. They let their names dissolve slowly into the fog. And because of that, they endure. Titicaca. Not just water, a mirror of choice. Between the poles of the stone kingdom of Tiahuanaco and the water kingdom of the Uros Lake, Titicaca bears witness. On one side, empires lifting their gaze to the gods. On the other, people bowing gently before the wind. Both are right. Both are great. For greatness, at times, lies not in scale, but in the way humanity chooses to engage with the world. Knossos lived by light. Titicaca lives by reflection. And within each ripple of its surface is the trace of those who chose not to conquer, but to quietly endure. No place remains a sanctuary forever. Not even Lake Titicaca, the birthplace of gods where empires once rose without weapons, can escape the roar of a changing world. One day, the lake was no longer still. The wind ceased to be a companion. The mist no longer stood guard, and the rhythm of reed paddles no longer echoed like the steady heartbeat of the earth, the footsteps of the Inca, and the shadow of iron. The Inca Empire, with its ambition to unify the entire Andes, did not arrive at Lake Titicaca as a child returning to its motherland, but as an heir reclaiming the throne. To them, Titicaca was sacred ground, the origin of all things, and thus it had to belong to them. They built new temples, sent emissaries to the island of the sun, absorbed the surrounding peoples into Cusco's intricate web of rituals and taxation. The small islands, once autonomous spaces, became satellites in the kingdom of light. For the first time, the lake had a clear master. And then, as history so often dictates where ownership begins, loss soon follows. White shadows from the west. In the year 1532, the Spanish set foot in Peru. They did not need a vast army, only a few hundred men and an ambition wrapped in the cross. They did not come to Titicaca to hear its legends, but to break them. The Sun Temple on Isla del Sol was destroyed. Sacred statues were melted down to mint coins. Priests were slain, converted, or vanished into the morning fog. Churches were built atop ancient foundations. And where once rose prayers now rang the sound of bells, not to summon gods, but to issue commands. For the people around the lake, this was not merely the loss of land, it was the loss of essence, the erasure of language, rituals, and belief. They were not only conquered, they were erased. The Euros, drifting to the margins. Under political, religious, and economic pressure, the Euros, the floating people were pushed further into the middle of the lake. Their reed islands, already fragile, grew even more vulnerable with no one left to protect them. The modern world does not care for those without land. No one writes history for those who plant no flag. No one records the words of those who live on water. And so the Euros quietly became shadows of themselves. The invisible threat, receding waters, and passing time. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Titicaca's tragedy no longer came from conquerors, but from a force no one could stop. The lake began to dry. Climate change caused water levels to drop to historic lows. Rivers that once fed the lake slowed. Rainy seasons grew erratic. The melting glaciers of the Andes could no longer keep pace. The Euros, who had once mastered the art of drifting, now had no water left to drift upon. Some reed islands were abandoned. Some families left the lake, resettling on shore in places of concrete and motorbike noise, where there were no reeds, no mist, only survival. They lived on, but they were no longer themselves. Titicaca, a fracture in faith. For so long, Lake Titicaca had stood as a place of faith that somewhere still existed where humanity could live in harmony with nature, where legend and reality intertwined like clouds and waves. But as the waters recede, as floating villages collapse, as ancient rituals are transformed into spectacles for tourists, we are forced to ask, is there anything left that remains sacred? Does the lake still reflect memory, or has it become a fractured mirror, reflecting only shattered pieces of history? Titicaca does not scream. It simply lets fall a single tear quiet enough to reach the deepest heart of anyone who still remembers. Titicaca was once the place where gods were born, where ancient cities sank, where empires drifted across the surface of the lake. And then it endured war invasion time and forgetfulness. But strangely, it never vanished, even as the waters receded, even as the people departed, even as memories were locked away inside museums. Titicaca remained not as a lake, but as a story unfinished. Old men who speak in mist and smoke. Along the rocky shores of Copacabana, or on the floating islands of the Euros, You may find old men, silver-haired, calloused hands, eyes tinged the color of water. They hold no books, but in their voices every word seems carved by the wind. They tell of Viracocha rising from the lake. They tell of a golden boat pulled beneath the surface by the gods for its greed. They tell of the reed woman who walked into the mist and never returned, but left her song behind each time the wind returns. These stories have no dates, no archaeological annotations, no evidence. They simply drift, just like life around this lake. Drift, but never disappear. Archaeology. When humans follow the wake of memory. Beneath the dark blue waters, archaeologists still continue their journey. They dive not only to recover pottery stone or ruins. They search for a way to retell a history once forbidden to speak. Stone walls at the lake's bottom. Tiny carved idols like frozen prayers. Simple foundations that, when pieced together, form a complex map of memory. Titicaca does not hand over its secrets. It leaves behind clues, and only those patient and still enough can hear the voice of a city that once breathed beneath the waves. Rituals that never ended, even though churches were built atop sacred temples, even though new doctrines were preached in Spanish, even though Coca-Cola replaced corn chicha. Each year, the people of the lake still gather on stone shores to offer to Pachamama, Mother Earth. They burn coca leaves, scatter corn, pour chicha into the water. There are no stages, no lights, only drifting clouds, rising smoke, and whispered words. This is not cultural preservation. It is the survival of memory. Because if what was lost is never spoken again, then it truly is lost. Tourism, the double-edged blade. Today, Titicaca is a famous destination. Travelers from all over the world come to sail to listen to photograph. They step onto the reed islands with phones, drones, and eyes full of wonder. For the Euros, it is an opportunity and a compromise. They reenact old dances, tell stories in a language tinged with modernity, sell crafts like fragments of a once mighty civilization. Some say they are performing, but perhaps it is through that very performance that memory finds a way to live on. For without an audience, who would still hear the lake's voice? And if the choice is between quietly vanishing or becoming a legend who smiles at strangers, then what is the true death? Titicaca, a memory that knows how to swim. Perhaps among all that has drifted here, from stone cities to reed boats, from rituals to ruins, the one thing that remains is memory's will to survive. It does not need to be etched onto gravestones. It does not need to be written in textbooks. It only needs a shoreline, a flame, a soul who still remembers. Titicaca is proof that some civilizations do not exist on maps, are not defined by borders, cannot be named by coordinates. They are remembered in sound, in color, in story. They do not need to be preserved. They only need not to be forgotten. If one day you stand by Lake Titicaca at dawn, watching the water rise ever so gently beneath a mist silver as incense smoke, you will understand. This is not merely a lake. This is a memory that knows how to swim. It knows how to dive deep when silence is needed. It knows how to rise when someone is ready to listen. A civilization with no flag, no emperor, no map yet. Still it has eyes, voices, and the wind. It does not ask to be honored in museums. It only asks that someone walk slowly and pause. Titicaca, where no one stands above, but everyone sees their reflection. There are no pyramids, no monuments of victory, no grand palaces. Titicaca offers only water, soft fluid, invisible. Yet it is the only thing that reflects everything, including you. In the face of the lake, you do not see gods. You do not see emperors. You see a human being, tired, questioning, searching, and quietly leaning down to hear the whisper from beneath the water. Perhaps that is the final definition of a civilization, not what we build, but what we cannot bear to let disappear. Knossos had walls scorched by fire, but its legends live on in every painted line. Giza had stones weighing tons, but what remains is the longing for immortality. Titicaca has nothing but memory, and that may be the most eternal treasure of all. We, those who came after, now stand between two choices. One, to keep searching, measuring, defining, and storing everything in vaults of knowledge. Or two, to sit down, look into the water, and remember. Because some stories do not need explanations. They only need someone to believe. And perhaps it is in the act of sitting still that the face of civilization finally appears. Not in the image of gods, not in the gleam of gold or the ruins of stone, but in the eyes of an old Uros man gazing at the sun for the 1,000th time, in the gentle splash of a paddle at dawn, in the touch of a child sketching the lake without knowing where they were born. Titicaca at last is the face of all of us, a face once drowned, once forgotten, once erased. But when the light is soft enough and the heart quiet enough, we do not see the bottom of the lake. We see what has been buried beneath the dust of time within ourselves. Longing, faith, the fear of being forgotten. And so Titicaca is not just an archaeological tale. It is a reminder that every civilization, no matter how great, will vanish like smoke if not held in love and memory, not remembered by name, but by the feeling of standing beside the lake and knowing you are no longer alone.